Everything you were taught about memory might be incomplete. Neurons fire signals, sure, but maybe that's not where the biggest shifts happen. We keep thinking consciousness is purely an electrochemical event, like a light switch flipping on and off in your head. But what if awareness isn't just electric? What if it's structural? Imagine your internal self isn't rigid marble, but liquid gel constantly flowing with tiny molecular currents. That fluid architecture, driven by microscopic cellular engines called actomyosin motors, seems to be the real scaffolding for who you are, allowing a fundamental phase transition in your state of mind before any conscious thought even forms. We often think of the brain as an electrical circuit, but what if our sense of self isn't built from fixed wiring? Think instead of something far more fluid, like a complex biological gel undergoing subtle shifts in pressure. That's where actomyosin dynamics comes in. Instead of relying solely on sharp spikes, researchers are finding that major subjective transitions, moments of awe or sudden clarity, may correlate with the slow, powerful restructuring inside our cells. The cytoskeleton functions as this living architectural framework, constantly polymerizing and reorganizing itself like active matter reacting to an invisible wave. This gives us a physical model for awareness not as a steady state, but as something that actively transitions between states. We used to think awareness was just an electrical spark happening in isolated neurons, like individual light bulbs turning on and off. But what if consciousness isn't about switching lights? What if it's more like heat rising in water, a slow emergence from movement itself? The real shift happens when massive collections of cells move together, coordinating their contractions into complex patterns. It is this coordinated ripple effect, driven by molecular motors within the cell framework, that researchers are calling systemic resonance. This physical architecture provides a substrate for what we experience as an internal phase transition, a sudden flow state or moment of awe, which means something nobody expected for how stable our sense of self actually is. Forget localized firing. Imagine awareness isn't an electrical signal flickering inside a single neuron, but rather something like water changing state, a phase transition. It is less about switches flipping and more about the entire architecture shifting. Think of your inner self not as solid concrete, but as living gelatin whose internal structure is constantly rearranging itself through molecular muscle movements. This active reorganization suggests consciousness emerges from coordinated waves across massive cellular systems. That's systemic resonance in action. Some critics argue that this level of complexity just leads to noise, dismissing the possibility of true emergence. But what if those subtle vibrations are actually precognitive flow states? The next step shows us precisely how tiny molecular jitters create these massive shifts. We keep thinking of consciousness as a spark. A neuron fires, the thought happens. But what if it's less like electricity and more like fluid dynamics? Imagine an entire complex structure vibrating subtly, shifting its shape without any obvious input. That is how awareness might operate internally. The cell isn't just sending signals. It's physically reorganizing itself through active matter processes. The push-pull of actomyosin filaments driving tension. These subtle physical shifts precede major changes in perception or flow state, like a massive gear grinding into place before the system locks on. But what if those minute, almost imperceptible internal strains are actually measurable gates between totally different modes of being? We have always assumed that awareness begins as an electrical spark, a localized event within specific neurons. But what if consciousness isn't fired? What if it flows? Consider the inside of any living cell. It's not just static biology, it is constantly moving matter, a vast, self-organizing architecture driven by molecular motors acting like microscopic tugboats. These filaments can contract, shift, and ripple across entire systems with incredible speed. If our subjective experience relies on these minute internal phase transitions, these transient shifts in physical tension, then the story of awareness isn't written in signal strength. It's written in movement itself. And if that is true, then where exactly do those microscopic currents lead us? Forget the idea that consciousness is just a collection of localized spark plugs firing in sequence. What if your subjective experience, moments like awe or sudden insight, isn't about signals, but about system architecture? Imagine shifting from flowing water to rigid ice, a phase transition driven by internal structure changing its fundamental state. This suggests our awareness might track these dynamic reorganizations at the cellular level. Transient physical shifts in tension and movement become the substrate for profound interchange. Stop looking only for spikes on a graph. start looking for resonance across the whole system. The full research archive is at jmthomasofficial.com. The real shift is in firing neurons. It's a structural phase transition inside the cell itself. Think of awareness not as a light switch turning on and off, but like water changing from ice to liquid. It involves massive systemic reorganization at its core. We found that subtle changes in cellular tension or movement can dictate whether we feel calm focus or sudden overwhelmed awe. This suggests our internal states mirror the principles governing all active matter systems in nature. The takeaway is this: look for those micro fluctuations in your own equilibrium. They are physical indicators of deep, imminent change. Don't just wait for the mind to shift. Watch the architecture underneath it happen. The full research archive is at jmthomasofficial.com.